So we'll get started. Good to see everybody out tonight. Glad you're here for our class. We've got, 19, 20, 21, 22, 4 more counting tonight. We'll wrap this up for this quarter. We're winding down the last week of Jesus' life. The mission he came for is about to be completed. So let's go back and review a little bit from Sunday morning with the crucifixion, and then got a couple more little papers I'll read you about that, and then we'll get into the burial tonight with it. Okay, Jesus has been to Annas and Caiaphas and to Pilate and to Herod and back to Pilate now, and they have flogged him. He's very well at a point near death based on what's normally done with one of the floggings. So they take the robe off and they put his clothes back on him and get ready to go out to the place of crucifixion. He carries his own cross. We don't know if it's just a cross beam or the entire cross, but that was customary to take your cross. He couldn't do it, so Simon was drafted to have him carried out there. A lot of people followed in the crowd, it seems like, and they go out to what we normally call Calvary, Golgotha, according to which language you're looking at, the place of the skull. There's actually been a picture of one place circulating that I've got a copy of it somewhere that actually looks like a face almost with eyes in the rocks type thing. They offer him some drink that would take the edge off. He refuses that. So then they get ready and they nail him to the cross. Arms outstretched, nails through either the wrist or the palms, according to where you read. It could be one or the other. I generally think went through the wrist area, but I'll read you one tonight. It talks about going through the palm of the hand. Nails through the feet, and then oftentimes a little perch to sit on to rest. I mean, just a little small thing, so you could raise up and get a breath of air in as the lungs will start, your body starts shrinking down, you can't breathe. Slow, painful way to die, crucifixion is. Jesus actually dies very quickly compared to what many would when they were crucified. And that was the intent of it. The Romans had, as you read, the Romans have perfected this way of killing someone, this execution style. It was designed to be totally painful. The word there on the second line, excruciatingly painful. I read again where that word was, excruciating was, one of the pieces I'll read tonight's got that in there. It's a Roman, the word was made at this time, meaning crucifixion. They had to find a way to describe it. I guess I'm trying to say. And I'll read it in a minute and you'll see it again. Not used for just everyone. I mean, reserved for those who were really bad or some way to deal with. We'll talk about that more in one of the papers. Several verses from Psalms 22 that talk about the crucifixion. Those who see me will ridicule me. They'll shoot out the lip, shake the head. They trust in the Lord. Let him deliver him now. I poured out like water. All my bones are out of joint. My heart's like wax. My strength's dried up. My tongue clings to my jaws. The thirst, dehydration, brought me to the dust of death. Dogs surrounded me. The congregation of wicked enclosed me. Pierced my hands and feet. Counted all my bones. They look and stare at me for the humiliation that's involved there. About 9 o'clock in the morning, when the crucifixion process begins, and Jesus is then from that process till noon, and we'll kind of draw a line there, then we'll talk about from noon till 3 o'clock on. But even they crucify him, he's asking for forgiveness for those who are doing what they did. They cast lots for his garments. The inner garment was one woven in piece, divide the other ones among themselves. Pilate puts the plaque up, says, "This is the King of the Jews." Chief priest didn't like it. Pilate said, "That's what's going to stay there." Crowd passes by and mocks him. And I'll read one of the pieces tonight. It talks about people walk by and slap, hit the ones that were on the cross. Thieves are there, crucified with him. John and his mother are there. He tells John to take care of his mother, her to go with him, looking after her. And they get the phrase, "Today you'll be with me in paradise," from the thief that's crucified with him there. And then it goes from 9 o'clock till about noon. This crucifixion process starts and it'll last there. So at 3 hours. Don't know exactly when he got physically on the cross, but already been flogged, beaten, slapped, mocked, ridiculed. So then at the end, it's "I thirst," the dehydration setting in, and they offer him again sour wine to drink. "It's finished," he says. And then he says, "Father, into your hands I commit my spirit." And he's ready to die. Man's work is done. Crucified our Lord. So that's where we left off last time. We had the map up here of the two places that are mentioned for the apostle places of the crucifixion and the tomb. One in the north. We'll talk about this toward the end tonight if I don't run out of time. One up here called the Garden Tomb, and then one down here. We'll talk about those two a bit more after a while. So let's move on now to some new territory tonight. What happened at the death? At noon, darkness comes over the earth for 3 hours, from noon to 3 o'clock, total darkness over the land. The big thing, then at 3 o'clock, when he dies, 3 p.m., it's the big temple veil, the veil between the holy place and the most holy place, rents, tears from top to bottom, totally in two. And we'll take us a few minutes and deviate and talk about that a little bit. Think about the temple activities that are going on. This is the Passover time. A lot of people in town for the Passover. I wouldn't be surprised, a lot more sacrifices being made than normal because of the people that are there. So a lot of activities in the temple. When this great veil this tears itself from top to bottom, and access to the most holy place was just opened up. So what's the significance? Why? What we get out of the fact that the veil rent from top to bottom? Open your Bibles to Hebrews chapter 6, if you will. And let's do a little reading in chapter 6, 7, and 9. Just a few verses here. Chapter 6, 7, and 9. We'll start off in chapter 6. And I don't know which, I gave this to 3 different people. I don't know who's got chapter 6. But James, you got 6 or 7? 6, okay. Chapter 6, verses 17 through 20. James is going to read for us. Okay. Okay, it mentions in verse 19, enters the presence behind the veil or behind the curtain. So it talks about a hope. It mentions it start in at the end of verse 18. This hope we have. It's an anchor and sure and steadfast. But behind the veil, in the presence of God. And we'll get to see this in the other readings in a minute. We'll talk about it more then. But think about the tabernacle and the ark, and then the mercy seat on top, the cherubim, And all through the tabernacle period and the temple, that's the presence of God. That's where God's presence was among the people. And we'll talk about the high priest going there one time a year, actually into that area where God was. And so Jesus, in his death on the cross here, has gone there. He's entered that Holy of Holies. We'll see in a minute. He's there. He broke down that veil, opened up that veil, so we have access to it. He's our high priest there forever. So let's go on now to chapter 7. And we'll read 23 through 27. Adam, I think you got that one. Okay, the priests under the Old Testament law, they died. They were physical humans. They were earthly priests. They died. Jesus lives forever. They were in heaven, behind the veil, presence of God, making intercession for us. He's our high priest, always there at the right hand of God. Not like once a year when the high priest would go in. He's always there for us. And then it's described here as the person he was. And no need for daily sacrifices, because he's already offered himself once for all. His blood was taken into that inner sanctuary, like the high priest would take the blood in and spread it for the sins of the people. His blood's gone there, and it's once for all. It's been done. So chapter 9 verses is a little longer, 1 through 14. And the first eight or so verses here are going to be a description of the Old Testament worship in the tabernacle, and then the latter part compares it then to what Jesus has done as he's gone into the presence of God from the New Testament. Okay, Bill. Okay. The description of that earthly tabernacle, laying the ground of what it does with this. The high priest entered the holiest of all, the most holy place once a year, into the presence of God with blood to sprinkle for the people for their sins. Even that couldn't make them perfect, as Bill read there. But Christ came as our high priest, offered his own blood for us once and for all, as we've already read, that we may have that intercession with God all the time, with him in God's presence. So that's the ripping of the veil, the opening up of the most holy place. So we have access through Jesus Christ to the presence of God, who made atonement for our sins. All right, what else happens at the death? Earth shook, the great earthquake, and rocks were split open, graves were opened, people who had been dead came back to life, went into the city of Jerusalem, walked around, appeared to other people. I mean, you got to think about this. It's a busy time in the city. People there for the feast. And just think about going down the street and somebody you died last week or last month sometime, and you see them there. I mean, they're back in the city, appearing to people. All this happened when Jesus died, some of the things. And then the centurion, the Roman centurion that was there at the cross. When he saw what happened, centurion and those with him, Matthew 7:54, who were guarding Jesus, saw the earthquake and the things that had happened. They feared greatly, saying, truly, this was the Son of God. The Roman centurion saying this. So, a question. What moved this man to make this statement? He's not a Jew. As far as we know, he's never been taught anything from Jesus. Why would he make this statement? That truly, this is the Son of God. Think about what he's observed. What's he seen happen? No doubt, he's been there at the cross. There's been people gathered around. He heard some talks, some conversations about it. He makes this statement based on what he's observed. He's convinced, truly, this is the Son of God. And you notice, he didn't say, truly, this is the King of the Jews. Think about the inscription that's written above his head up there. No doubt he could see that. That's not what he said, though. He didn't say, oh, these Jews are wrong. This really was their king, based on what he saw happen. Truly, this was the King of the Jews. He didn't say that. He said, truly, this was the Son of God. An amazing conclusion, amazing statement by this Roman centurion. That's it. Jesus is dead. Satan wins. Satan's conquered. Go back to Genesis 3:15 in your mind a minute. The very first sin, Adam and Eve in the garden. God's pronouncing the judgment on the man and the woman and on the serpent. He tells the serpent, you're going to bruise his heel. But what if history stopped there? Satan wins. Fortunately for all of us, it didn't. This is the Friday. We got to think of some time in here. This is Friday before the Passover, before the Sabbath. The Jews' timing starts, as many of you know, starts at 6 o'clock at night. So on Friday night at 6 o'clock, it's going to be the Sabbath. So their day goes from 6 o'clock one night till 6 o'clock the next night, where we go from midnight to midnight. So it's 6 o'clock on Friday night. It's a Sabbath day. No work. Don't do anything. And the chief priest wants the body off of the cross before the Sabbath starts. So Jesus died at 3 o'clock. So we've got like a 3-hour window in here. The chief priest wants him off of the cross. So they go to Pilate. It said, make sure they're dead. So we'll get these bodies down before the Sabbath. So one way to accomplish this, and I'll read some of this in a minute, is to break their legs. They go out and break the legs of the people on the cross. And what they can't do then, when the weight's all pulled down, they can't breathe. So one reason a little stool was sitting there to push up on, or they take the feet with all kind of excruciating pain and try to raise up. Of course, you got a nail driven through your feet that you're pushing on. Is so they can get a breath of air. You can get one gasp. But if you break those legs, they can't push up. So it means they're going to die quicker from suffocation. So they send them out to break the legs, which was a common thing to do to cause them to mercifully die or to speed them up to death. So through traumatic shock. So they go out and break the legs of the two thieves because they're not dead yet. But Jesus is already dead. When they come to him, he's already dead. So they don't break his legs. But to be sure that he's dead, one of the Roman soldiers pierces up through his side, and blood and water comes forth. Now, I'll read about that in a minute, but the way it hits the heart, the sac around the heart, where the blood and the water comes from. And he's making sure that was his task. Put the bodies down before Sabbath begins. Make sure they're dead. Break their legs. He's already dead. Make sure. Stick the spear in it to him. That's what these two verses talk about. One that's not, no bones are broken in Psalms, and in Zechariah 12 is they pierced his side. To prophecies. So now we've got two men. Both members of the Sanhedrin. Both members of the Jewish high court. Nicodemus, remember from John chapter 3, when it came to Jesus at night. Jesus talks to him about the new birth. Long discussion there in John chapter 3. Joseph is another member of the Sanhedrin. Now we don't know what these men were doing the whole time the Sanhedrin is voting to kill Jesus. They both appear to be disciples. So were they just outnumbered? Did they speak up? Was anything said about them? What did they do while the mocking was going on there in the front of the Sanhedrin? We don't know this. But Joseph is a rich man. He has a tomb that is hewn out of rock. Nobody's been in it before, which is important. Nobody's been in that tomb before. So he goes and asks for the body of Jesus. Ask Pilate. Now, maybe because of his position on the Sanhedrin, he felt comfortable going to talking to Pilate. Don't know exactly. You got to think some things through here. Nicodemus then comes bringing spices, which is what they would do. They didn't embalm the body. They put the spices in the grave clothes. So these two men come in and they prepare Jesus for death, for his burial, I mean. A little lesson to think about here. What would the other 68 members of the Sanhedrin think about these two men if they saw what they were doing? This is the Jewish high court that has condemned Jesus to die. But they say these two men that were out there taking Jesus' body down, wrapping it in the burial clothes, putting spices with it, mocking, ridicule. I don't know. I can imagine they'll be too happy about it. Just thinking about it a little bit. Peer pressure. Sometimes there's a time you got to step up and do what's right. It seemed like that's what these two guys did. They just stepped up and didn't worry about that. They took care of what needed to be done. So, something for us to think about. So together they wrapped the body together and prepared it for burial in this tomb near the place of crucifixion. Again, no other body had been buried there. Again, that's important because of some of the things that were said about, was it really Jesus that came out of the tomb, or is it somebody else who was dead there? And they placed the body in this tomb, rolled a stone across it, and the women were watching what's going on, so they know where it is. And Isaiah 53:9 talks about being buried with the rich, talking about the rich Joseph here in his unused tomb. Mary Magdalene, Mary the mother of Jesus, and some other ladies there are watching and see where it is. They're going to fix more spices to come back and put them with the body later on. But the Sabbath's coming up, and they've run out of time here. Now, Chief Priest comes back up, and he thinks, this guy made a comment that after 3 days, he would raise him from the dead. And he said, that would be a problem. Be a major, major problem. Ever how it happened? When the disciples went and stole the body out of the tomb, and claimed he was raised because there's no body in the tomb, or whatever it may be, the chief priest could not afford to have that happen. So he goes to Pilate again and gets Pilate to come out and seal the tomb. Black seal, I don't know exactly how they did it. They set a Roman guards to guard that tomb. So nobody could come and steal the body. Not going to happen. Now they'll claim later it did, but not going to happen. Roman soldiers there to guard it. Now all this happened on Friday, before the start of the Sabbath at 6 o'clock Friday night. So keep the timeline in mind here a little bit. So now activities cease because they got to stop for the Sabbath. We've got to pick back up then after the Sabbath is over. Whoops. Uh-oh. Wait, the wrong. All right, your pictures aren't there. I'll put them here for Sunday. I must have copied the wrong slides off of my computer. I got some pictures in here. Rebecca talked to me Sunday morning after class. The two spots for the crucifixion and the tomb. One in the north part of the city, and then one down a little further south. Remember that map I had up there with the two spots on it? Rebecca told me some of the reasons from their study and all as to why the north part, called the Garden Tomb, is not a logical choice to be made for the burial and the crucifixion and burial of Jesus. And Steve, when he was over there, we were talking about it a few weeks ago, and he also would put emphasis on the southernmost of the two, which is where the Church of the Holy Sepulchre is. And I've got those slides that she gave me. It's got some tombs in it. We'll talk about it. And then I've got some more slides in then before we get to the tomb and the resurrection. Let's look at there. Let me read you a couple of papers here right quick. This is back about, and the reason I've got the wrong slides is I had a place here to read these papers too, so I'm sorry. Just copied the wrong ones. I added some more to it. A couple of papers about crucifixion. This is from a website called eSites from March of 2002. It was unanimously considered the most horrible form of death. Amongst the Romans, the degradation was also a part of the infliction. The punishment was applied, if it was applied to freedmen, was used only in the cases of the vilest criminals. F.W. Farrer wrote, this is a quotation, "The one to be crucified was stripped naked of all his clothes. Then followed the most awful moment of all. He was laid down upon the implement of torture. His arms were stretched along the crossbeams. At the center of the open palms," this guy goes to the palms, "the point of a huge iron nail was placed, which, by the blow of a mallet, was driven home into the wood. Then through either foot separately, or possibly through both feet together, as they were placed one over the other, huge nail tore its way through the quivering flesh. Whether the sufferer was also bound to the cross, we don't know. And the reason there is if you just nail through the hands, the weight of the body would tear the skin out. So they also sometimes would tie the person to the cross. But to prevent the hands and feet from being torn away from the weight of the body, which could not rest upon nothing but great wounds, there was about the center of the cross a wooden projection, support, at least part of a human body, which came a weight of agony. Then the accursed tree with its living human burden was slowly heaved up at the end fixed firmly in the hole in the ground. Now he goes here with the fact that the cross was all made and laid down and the person nailed to it. The one I read Sunday had the vertical piece in the ground and he just took the crossbar and put it on the top each time. So a different views of the crucifixions. The feet were a little raised above the earth. The victim was in full reach of every hand that might choose to strike. A death by crucifixion seems to include all the pain and death could have, but horrible and ghastly dizziness, cramps, thirst, starvation, sleeplessness, traumatic fever, tetanus, publicity of shame, long continuance of torment, horror of anticipation, mortification of the untended wounds, all intensified up just to the point at which they would cause unconsciousness, but stopping just short of it. The unnatural position made every movement painful. The lacerated veins and crushed tendons throbbed with incessant anguish. The wounds, inflamed by exposure, gradually gangrened. The arteries, especially of the head and stomach, became swollen and oppressed with surcharged blood. While each variety of misery went on gradually increasing, there was added to them the intolerable pain and burden of raging thirst. Such was the death to which Christ was doomed. So that's his description of a crucifixion. This is from a paper called The Failed Atheist. It's kind of a strange title because the subtitle says, I'm almost an atheist. I just believe in one God. I just believe in one more God than you do. And God's a Catholic Jew. So the guy's kind of taken off on the fact that I'm not really an atheist. I believe in God. I believe in one God. So he's answering a question here. Could Jesus have survived on the cross? Could he have really not died on the cross? Which is something called the swoon, S-W-O-O-N theory, that Jesus really didn't die. He just almost died. And that's been kicked around for years. So here's his reasons why it couldn't happen. Even the preparation for crucifixion was enough to kill many and show us that Jesus would have been in terrible state before he even made it to the cross. Jesus was flogged with a lead-tipped whip, slapped, John 19. The whips often had jagged pieces of bone and lead woven into it. So before even getting to the cross, Jesus would have had to undergo a minimum of 39 hits. That would have been the Jewish thing. The Romans didn't have any limit. With a whip, which was often enough to expose the victim's veins and organs, struck with a reed stick, spit on, blindfolded, and beat with fists, Mark 14 and 15. So I can imagine that the Roman soldiers knew how to punch very well. A crown was put on his head and beaten, Matthew 27, chapter 27. The thorns found in Israel often 3 inches long or longer. So following on from what just was the preparation, Jesus would have had the nails, Roman nails were 5 to 7 inches long, put through his wrists and feet. Not only would this be extraordinarily painful, it would have been made it extremely difficult to breathe. This is because once across, the victim would be raised in position where the breathing would have to take all the pressure off his arms to inhale. We talked about that a little bit earlier. This would usually lead to a very slow and painful death that could often take days. The pain was so unbearable, a new word had to be created, excruciating. And this is literally means out of the cross. And I looked it up today. Actually, Shirley did, sitting there. And if you look up the word excruciating, it goes back, and it's made up from Latin words, crucifixion. So the word excruciating actually comes from crucifixion. They coined that word to describe what it's like for a crucifixion. It was to describe the torment people would have gone through during this terrible means of execution. Recent medical research on the cause of death during crucifixion just does vary depending on the exact methods used by the individuals themselves. Suggested some would die of shock or pulmonary embolism. Jesus' legs weren't broken by the Roman soldiers for 2 reasons. It was often seen as a merciful act to put someone out of their misery due to the pain they were going through. This wasn't seen as necessary as the soldiers, since Jesus appeared to die quite quickly following his horrendous preparation. It's also used as a means of speeding things up. Since the victim's legs were broken, they could no longer lift themselves up to breathe. they would die of asphyxiation. So what we can see is Jesus was quite clearly dead, no swooning, he was dead. Clearly, since these soldiers had overseen many deaths, and who better to make such a decision. Anyway, like a good Roman soldier, just to be sure he was dead, they thrust their spear through his side. John chapter 19, the mix of blood and water is described by medical experts as being due to the rupturing of the pericardium, which is the sac around the heart. This puncture would have led to small amounts of clear fluid, followed by a large amount of blood, just as John describes in his gospel. It's clearly preposterous to think that Jesus, after being punched, flogged, crucified, stabbed in the side, would have managed to convince anyone 3 days later that he was a risen Messiah. To think otherwise clearly is a view that doesn't take into account the facts surrounding the crucifixion and the process that gets involved in it. He's just saying there's no way that somebody could have survived what Jesus went through and not be dead. That's his main point. All right. One more point right quick. We got just enough time to cover it, I think. Talked to you the other day. I mentioned the fact that there are other timelines given by people as far as the crucifixion week. We've been talking in here of Jesus, all this happening with the supper on Thursday night, midnight in the garden, plus or minus time frame, the trials happening early Friday morning, and then the crucifixion between 9 and then the darkness from noon till 3 on Friday afternoon, and then getting him in the grave before 6 o'clock Friday night before the Sabbath starts. There are others who have a problem with this. And the problem is based on the fact that Jesus had said at one time that just as Jonah was in the belly of the great fish 3 days and 3 nights, he would be in the heart of the earth 3 days and 3 nights. So, think about it. Friday afternoon, ladies, he's killed or dies. Saturday's in the tomb, and Sunday he comes out. So you got Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. That's okay with the Jewish time to count the 3 days. But what have you got night-wise? Friday night, Saturday night. 2 nights. So to reconcile that, some go to this Wednesday crucifixion. So this kind of zooms in on that chart I had there. So what they're showing here is that he would have died here around 3 p.m. on Wednesday. Okay? And then things cease for this high Sabbath day, which is not the usual weekly Sabbath, but it's a special, I think it's an annual or it's a longer than that, I can't remember time frame, but this special day occurs here. Things would cease there. So he's in the tomb Wednesday night, Thursday night, and Friday night. And then they have him coming out of the grave here late on Saturday. Exactly 3 days and 3 nights, little print here says, exactly 3 days, 3 nights after his death. So 3 days and 3 nights in the tomb. The problem I have with that, well, a problem I have with that, the other problem, just one obvious problem. If he died 3 o'clock here on Wednesday, and he rose exactly 3 days later, which they put it here, exactly there, then that means the resurrection occurred on Saturday, not on Sunday. Okay? So they talk about, somewhere on this chart, about, here it is, Good Friday to Easter Sunday. Well, what's special about Easter Sunday? If Jesus rose before the Saturday was over, the Sabbath was over, he wasn't raised on Sunday. So there's no significance to it. Here's another chart that shows it a little clearer, the same thing. So you've got him dying here on Wednesday before 6 o'clock, 3 o'clock. And it would come out of the grave here. And here's the lines to show the day breaks. So Wednesday ends here, Thursday starts that Wednesday night into Thursday. Friday starts here, and Saturday goes to here. So Sunday starts here, and Jesus is already raised before Sunday gets here. It's a little twist to anything I've ever seen before. There's one article I read that says, was Jesus crucified on Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday? There's even some who would put him on Thursday. So anyhow, just kind of throw that out to think about a little bit if you want to do some digging and research one of these days. We talked about it here entirely, the Thursday night to Friday time frame with resurrection, of course, on Sunday morning. But a little different twist to it if you haven't heard that before. Sorry I missed the pictures. I'll put them in for Sunday. We'll look at that point then that Rebecca made about the tombs. It's interesting, and I'll show it date to you Sunday.
In summer, I was about 7, 8 years old, and my dad and I walked out with my dad, had a bottled water, and he was changing the oil or something in our car, and I was helping him move something. I knocked the bottled water over, and I noticed something peculiar happen. The water didn't just roll in this nice sheet of water down the driveway, but it went in like a kind of a weird snaky way in its own weird path, and it puddled here and there in different little spots, and some little streams ran further. About 4 or 5 years later, I became a Christian when I was 13, and that summer, it's super hot. It's already hot, and it's the winter. So it was a really hot summer day, and just as quickly as I'd knocked the water over, it had dried up. And in the concrete, you can kind of see where the water has been, recently. And so I thought, I don't know, I was a 7-year-old kid, so I poured more water out into the driveway, and the water took almost the exact same path, the exact same route, and it was really strange. It varied a little bit, but it was almost perfectly the same way. It puddled up in the same different spots. And of course, later on, you learn about physics and you understand the path of least resistance, and it took the easiest way to get to where it wanted to stop. We, as humans, tend to do the same thing. We take the path of least resistance. We take the easiest way, with water, it makes sense. There's gravity, there's the friction, the physics of it work. And when water does that, it becomes easier and easier, the way that path has been made. Take rivers, for example, and little streams. It kind of carves its way out, becomes more established, becomes wider, becomes deeper. And little things like this, they come to an inevitable stop. And then it gets stagnant, and it sits, and it's gross, and it's infested with bugs and death, and it's foul. And we call it a swamp, or just a cesspool, something you don't want to be around. There are mosquitoes being born, and just, you don't want to be around it. Foundations are not poured where there is water sitting. It's a terrible place to be. It's like us. We have the same kind of characteristic. We often take a path of least resistance. And there's hundreds of examples that we could use. And traffic is a really easy one. If there's a packed area, there's been a car wreck, okay, what's the path of least resistance? How can I take a shortcut? What's the easiest way to get out of here? And of course, our spiritual lives are reflected in the same way. We do various things that are easier than others. We cut corners. We justify our actions. We get used to our ways and decisions. Others ignore us because it's easier for them. It's their path of least resistance. For whatever reason, we as humans equate comfort with happiness. And that's not always the case, and it's definitely not the case with our lives in relation to God and Jesus and our walk toward heaven, our race toward heaven. This is a huge topic stressed in Hebrews. In the 2nd chapter, it says, "Therefore we must not pay close attention to what we have heard, lest we drift away." The writer talking to the Hebrews of these new converts, and these people have been in their old ways a long time, and now to abandon that and follow the ways of Jesus is very difficult, and it's so easy and effortless to take the path of least resistance in what you know and what you've done and what's ingrained in you, in a sense, and drift away. We, several guys here not long ago, we went on a big kayaking canoe trip, and that was a lot of fun. I wish we had floated. It was a very still river, and we took every muscle to keep going, but we floated on down, and that's kind of the symbolism I want you to have in your mind. We're not the water, we're sitting on the water, and sometimes we float and we find our way there. There is there's a lot of people that are sick and lost and that are floating, and it's a deep and wide path for them. It's still the path of least resistance. There are people here with ongoing sickness, spiritual sickness, that are stagnant and infested with sin. There's this book I've been reading, or actually I read, I finished it last year, I kind of come back to it. It's called The Power of Habit. As far as I know, from what I can remember, it's really clean. I don't remember any foul language. But the writer, Charles Duhigg, quotes a writer in one of the chapters toward the end of the book, and he quotes a book called The Principles of Psychology. Anyway, the writer here says, water, he said, is the most apt analogy for how habits work. Water hollows out for itself a channel, which grows broader and deeper, and after having ceased to flow, it resumes. And when it flows again, the path traced by itself before. It just shows how habitual water moves, and how we are the same way with the habits that we create and the habits that we make. I mentioned my dad just a little bit ago. 10 years, this year it'll be 10 years since my dad left my mom and my family, left us. And, it's been difficult. A lot of people go through things like that. One time, a lot of you know Jonah. He's not here tonight. But one time, my brother Jonah was 13, and a member of the church ran into him and said, how's your dad doing? How's things going? And Jonah, was honest and said, I don't really know. Don't see him very much. And the man said, he said, I ran into him not long ago, and I talked to him, and, my dad's name is Travis. He said, Travis was trying to have a conversation like nothing happened. He said, I interrupted him and said, Travis, you made some mistakes. You don't have to keep on making them. You've made mistakes. You don't have to keep making them. To put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life, and is corrupt through deceit desires, and to be renewed in the spirit by your mind, put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. I appeal you, therefore, brothers, by the mercies of God, to present your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and acceptable to God, which is your spiritual worship. Do not be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind, that by testing you may discern what is the will of God, what is good and acceptable and perfect. Blessed is the man who remains steadfast under trial, for when he has stood the test, he will receive a crown of life, which God has promised to those who love him. Do not love the world or the things of the world. If anyone loves the world, the love of the Father is not in him. Do you not know that you are God's temple and that God's Spirit dwells in you? Give no opportunity to the devil. Do not be deceived. Bad company ruins good morals. But be doers of the word and not hearers only, deceiving yourself. If we confess our sins, he is faithful and just to forgive us of our sins and cleanse us from all unrighteousness. Whoever conceals his transgressions will not prosper, but who confesses and forsakes them will obtain mercy. Therefore, confess your sins to one another and pray for one another, that you may be healed. The prayer of a righteous person has great power as it is working. Do not lie to one another, seeing that you have put off the old self with its practices and have put on the new self, which is being renewed in knowledge after the image of the Creator. So I finished this part a little early in the book. He says, water, he said, is the most apt analogy for how a habit works. Water hollows out itself a channel which grows broader and deeper, and after having ceased to flow, it resumes. When it flows again, the path traced by itself before. You know how to redirect the path. You now have the power to swim. You probably think you're stuck. It's too deep. It's too wide to reach, rather. You've drifted and you've drifted, and you've got some secret sin that's going to make you look bad, and it's going to hurt your family's name, and people will always see you as this person who's done this. Start swimming. Start doing something about it. Everyone in this room is on your team. If there's anything we can do for you, come as we stand and as we sing.